Hello, my name's Tom Cahill. This is part of the series that I'm doing of videos about the Alistair Ponzi scheme and its wider implications for society and how it links to more famous news stories which you probably might well have heard of or you can easily look up. I'm going to touch on the libel laws, the harassment laws, and how these are currently being abused in order to silence people, and how solicitors and lawyers are utilising civil actions in their defence of criminality so that it might continue. Now, this is totally different from defending somebody who's been charged with a crime or defending somebody who's been arrested by the police and is awaiting possible charge for a crime. This is somebody makes reasonable inquiry to a criminal organisation, and the next thing they know, the criminal organisation is acting against them, making them, trying to silence them and intimidate them, and put restrictive orders on them, which allows the crime to continue, the criminality to continue, and in doing so scares other people from raising a red flag. Now, the firm that I've got one of the firms that I've got particular experience with is a firm called Carter-Ruck. That's Carter-RUCK. It was founded by Peter Carter-Ruck, who was very famous, and he was a little notorious for being extremely keen to overbill clients, and he sued people on behalf of, he got told by his firm that he needed to retire, so he set up his own company. So, he was quite a gamesman, I suppose. The point is, I don't know much about him. The point is, he was dead probably before I was even born. I don't know. Thing is, the firm continues since his death, and they've pioneered new lows in the extent to which libel lawyers become involved with the prolongation of crime and very, very nefarious activity, like the Trafigura case, for instance, where they were trying to put an injunction on the House of Commons over parliamentary privilege. The solicitor who was in charge of that was somebody called Adam Tudor. He's Welsh. I've had dealings with him. He's sort of a pen friend of mine. He won't speak to me on the phone now that I know that he knows that the emperor wears no clothes. I know they don't, and he won't. He's very unlikely to want to speak to me because he knows I'll record it and use it to make him look like an idiot. Because all this, it is all bullshit, baffles brains. Make no mistake about it. The point is, Carter-Ruck also represented the McCann family. In the past, quite a long time ago, probably 20, maybe 30 years ago, they represented Jimmy Savile. Another thing, if we look at the Aston Lloyd case, they represented a company called Tullet Brown. That's Tullet Brown. You know how to spell that. Carter-Ruck were reported as aiding scammers Tullet Brown, enabling them to continue trading for 3 years whilst netting 3.2 million from investors. Again, the use of the word investors. They're not investors, they're victims of crime, aren't they? So they're not investors. They threatened to sue journalists, including Tony Levine, if they reported the information publicly, thus stifling free speech. Unfortunately, Levine himself stifled an investigation by another newspaper by alerting Carter-Ruck through his internet postings. Carter-Ruck appeared to try and distance themselves from criticism in the press by replying to the Guardian's questions. Quote, "The partner who dealt with Tullet Brown is no longer at Carter-Ruck. Also, as you are aware, Tullet Brown is now in liquidation. We have no instructions to respond to your questions." End of quotations. Now, this is the sort of nonsense that you will get from these people. Right, so let me recap. It's the microcosm and the macrocosm. These things that happen apparently on telly, like massive cases like the Madeleine McCann case, they do actually have a bearing on what happens if you question the corrupt establishment and these insider firms. You will start to find that you will get responses from people who are actually quite famous and deal with quite high profile stuff, and you start getting quite an interesting insight into it. Now, the thing with the Aston Lloyd Ponzi scheme is that the solicitors for them, who, depending on which day you ask them and who they're answering to, did the conveyancing or didn't do the conveyancing, even though they've accepted that they did, but also said that they didn't, were a firm called, and they did other things as well, or didn't, depending on who asks them, are called Coleman's-CTTS, and they're run by somebody called Roger Coleman, Roger the Dodger. That's what I refer to him as, and Nigel Tarrant, who runs the Kingston office. Now, the Kingston office, Kingston's in London for anyone who doesn't know. The Kingston office is quite separate, but the thing is, Roger Coleman's well aware of what Nigel's up to, or he should well have made himself aware of it. In the Kingston office, they were administrating all of ALPonz's, money coming in, money going out, and they were doing conveyancing or not doing conveyancing. This is what makes it so very confusing, because they claim or pretend that they were doing one thing and then they deny doing it, and sort of say that because you're not their client, they didn't have to do it, but surely they must have been doing it for something. What were they being paid for? Anyway, but very, it goes on and on. But the point is, I picked them up on this, and they were very non-responsive to start off with. Then I sent an email to every solicitor at Coleman CTTS. I believe it was 75 qualified solicitors working for them. I sent it one evening. It went round all of them, and I told them to put their professional indemnity insurance on notice, because at very best there's severe gross negligence going on, but every solicitor in England has to have professional indemnity insurance, otherwise it's illegal for them to practice. Now, when they know via a notification that their professional indemnity insurance is compromised because their colleagues are acting in a criminal manner, that obviously invalidates that insurance. And this is always a good one when you're dealing with bent professionals. You alert everybody at the firm that their insurance is going to take a dink, and you tell them to put them on notice. Now, they won't want to put them on notice, because as soon as they put their insurance on notice, their insurance will then appoint their own solicitors to defend that claim. Now, I'm still not sure whether the solicitor who's effectively the client of the insurance gets to choose which solicitor to use, or whether the insurance chooses. But when it comes down to the line, even though to start off with, that second solicitor, the defending solicitor of the bent solicitor, or allegedly bent solicitor, will claim to be taking instructions, if you like, from the allegedly bent solicitor, the one who's done something impropriety or has been accused of it. As and when it goes down the track further, and it becomes obvious that they've got nowhere to run, and they've been lying to the defending solicitor, because they can't just tell them, yeah, we did it, just cover up for us. They sort of give them all these bullshit stories, and the bullshit stories obviously keep changing because they're bullshit, especially with Coleman CTTS in this instance, because they were telling different regulatory bodies they did different things. For instance, they were telling one lady via the legal ombudsman that they did represent her, and that was obviously because if there's, say, 600 to 1,000 claimants, if you're having to alert the fact that you've only represented one of the, say, 1,000 people, the liability is a lot smaller. But if you say, oh no, we represented this firm, and then they say, well, how many people could this apply to? And you say 1,000, you see it's going to be a lot worse. So they thought that she wasn't talking to anyone else, so they told her, she says, that they were representing her, and that she paid their wages, and that's why. And then other people, they were saying that the firm, who, despite the fact we paid for legal expenses, that was going to the firm, even though it actually went to them and they gave it to the firm. They were saying that went to the firm, and then the firm paid them, so we were paying for the firm to act against us. It doesn't make any sense, of course, because it's fraud, right? But the point with this particular instance here is, you've got the solicitor who is the defending solicitor will eventually concede that they do act for the insurance company. Now, whenever you're dealing with solicitors, you've got to realise that their main game is to make you think that you're between the devil and the deep blue sea. So let's say you are in some big commercial dispute with somebody, they'll try and make out that, oh, we're going to help you. As soon as you get sucked in, they start saying, you need to give us more money, you need to give us more money. So, be it money, be it property, be it your children or a divorce or something like that, they then sort of scare you. So you've got the scary thing they're meant to be helping you with, and then they start scaring you, fucking you around, not answering your phone calls, all that type of stuff, billing you and not actually doing what they're saying they're going to do. All this type of stuff is all a trick because it gets the person in a stress position, and you put them under duress, they panic, they don't know what they're doing, and you can just basically lever money out of them. That's how it works. Now, when you're dealing with solicitors, you should do the same thing. So what you do, as soon as they start acting up, because they almost always do, you get their insurance notified. Now, the way it works is, if you go to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, which is part of the Law Society who regulates them, they have got a rule that says you're allowed to have their insurance details. Now, what they'll do is they'll say, have you given them a month to give them to you? Because you've got to demand them in writing first from the bent solicitor or allegedly bent solicitor. They will try and give you excuses not to give you the insurance details. Then, say after a month, you write to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the Enforcement Department. It used to be a guy called Tony Coletta, but he's left when they moved offices. And what they'll do is they'll normally give them another month, then they'll provide the details to you. Now, as soon as you contact that firm, the insurance broker or the underwriter, I forget which one it is, they will then start a claim against them, or they'll start an investigation. Now, this is always a very good idea to do. Anyway, this is what Common CTTS were trying to avoid doing. And so when I started asking them questions and they weren't playing ball, which I knew they wouldn't, I was under no illusions that they wouldn't, various things happened. So I didn't do this straight away because I was busy with some other things. There was other related points which meant that I couldn't do it straight away, which I won't go into now. But I eventually got their insurance details. But around the same time, I got a letter from Carter-Ruck, and they were telling me that, basically I mustn't say this and I mustn't do this and I mustn't do the other. Now, the thing that prompted that, this was a few days later, was the fact that I sent an email to the firm. Every single solicitor was copied in on it, saying to them, you are acting outside of the parameters of your insurance contract because your firm is doing criminal things. You may or may not be aware of it. You need to be aware of it, because now that you know that your insurance is going to be invalidated, every single thing you've done since I initially demanded the insurance details more than a year ago, technically speaking, that insurance has been invalid all of that time, and that might become publicly known. And shock horror, if you've been representing a client and it turns out your insurance is not in line, you will be personally liable for any costs, you see. And that's the one that got them, because they all obviously shit themselves and realise they could actually be personally liable for all the things that they obviously mess up on a daily basis. Right, so, and here's the letter that I got from Carter-Ruck. I'll just read through it. You can see other letters from Carter-Ruck on the internet because they quite often threaten people. They're very long, very boring letters. They're not particularly sharp. They're not, as lawyers go, they're all quite extremely boring. Get quite bored reading them. Anyway, this was from Adam Tudor, and it was emailed to me to start off with and also sent as well. And this was on the 29th of September 2011. Right, it said, "Dear Sir, strictly private and confidential." That doesn't mean anything, by the way. This in no way ties you into it being confidential. Coleman CTTS LLP. That's the subject line. We have been consulted by Coleman CTTS and its senior partner, Roger Coleman. Sorry, we've been consulted yet. And then it says, our clients. So it says clients. So it's a client, then clients. It's a bit weird. I'll come back to this in a minute. Our clients have drawn to our attention various emails which you sent to a number of individuals at Coleman CTTS. On the 16th of September 2011, right now, this is 16th, this was the 29th, so it took them a few days, as well as an email which you sent to Tony Coletta at the SRA on the 14th of September, which was copied to individuals at Coleman CTTS. So that was me sending a letter to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and I copied it in to the individuals at the firm to realise, so they'd realise that Coleman was acting in an insolent manner and not doing what he was meant to do and what he has to do. So Roger the Dodger was trying to dodge out of what he's meant to do. Obviously, I wasn't going to let him do that, and that's why I copied them all into it, so they couldn't deny it afterwards. But you see, if you note here, he's trying to make out as though that in some way is wrong writing to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, demanding something that the solicitors, I forget what they're called, their code of conduct says you're allowed to have and they have to give you. So he's kind of objecting on a illegitimate ground anyway. Right. We have also reviewed other communications which you have sent since August 2010, including that dated the 1st of October 2010. It is not the purpose of this letter to set out and comment in detail on each of the allegations and innuendos contained in your various emails. Suffice it to say, in general terms, however, that those emails are grossly defamatory. Now, I'll quickly go over. If you want to do someone for defamation, you have to be very specific about what you're objecting to, or what you think that they're trying to say, or what they're saying, what you believe that that person thinks they meant to say, and why it's defamatory. You can't just object in general terms. There's certain things, like if someone said something that was just, generally offensive, you'd have to explain that it was mere vulgarity, which you can still get in trouble for, but the point is it's not defamation, it's different. And if it's something more general, you have to actually have some kind of substance to it. You can't just generally object to the fact they've said something you don't like. You have to be very specific about what you think they meant that they were saying when they said it, and why it's defamatory. Do you see? So if you look at it, it is not the purpose of the letter to be set out in detail on each of the allegations and innuendos carried out in various emails. Suffice it to say, in general terms, however, those emails are grossly defamatory, both of Coleman CTTS collectively, of Mr. Coleman, and of certain other named individuals at the firm. In short, the emails will have been understood to allege, as you no doubt intended them to do. But you see, if you go back there, I've written to people at his firm, not him. I didn't copy him in. I wrote to all these people, or did I copy him? I forget, to say that he has been not shooting them straight because he's not been updating his insurance when he's told to. So the idea that they could be representing both, when quite clearly the purpose of my email was to alert everybody else at his firm. This wasn't something I sent to the public. The Solicitors Regulation Authority saw it, but they're part of the same organisation, so that that's not like it's publicly in the public domain. I was writing this to alert those people, so the idea that I'd be somehow defamatory to them, or it would be wrong of me to notify them with an official notification, when notifying people of professional indemnity insurance claims that possibly might crop up is a professional courtesy and not a kind of offensive gesture, then that's very unusual. So right at the start of the letter, you can see that he's kind of telegraphed the fact that he hasn't got anything to go on. He's just talking shit, basically. And that's what a lot of Carter-Ruck's letters look like. If you look at ones on the internet they send to people often put them up there, you can sort of tell at the start whether they've got anything to say or not. Anyway, I'll read again. In short, the emails will have been understood to allege, as you no doubt intended them to do, that Coleman CTTS, whether collectively or through certain individuals at the firm, has committed and is complicit in fraud in relation to its former retainer by Aston Lloyd and Partners. That Coleman CTTS has defrauded, has defrauded and is continuing to defraud its professional indemnity insurance. No, but I said that's what he's doing. I didn't infer. I just said that's what it is, and that is what it is. That Roger Coleman is a bent solicitor who is guilty of a number of criminal acts, which I did say, yes. That by failing to notify the firm's PI insurer of a large claim against the firm, Mr. Coleman is likely to be exposing his colleagues to personal liability and causing them to act unlawfully, which he is, and they know well. You see, so they kind of telegraph it. They say they're not going to comment specifically, and then they comment specifically because this is just what they do to spin it out. As well as being highly defamatory of our clients, these allegations are also completely untrue. Underlined. There is no basis whatsoever for your assertion that Coleman CTTS or anyone at the firm, they always put these extra little bits in to pad it out, misconducted itself in any way in relation to its retainer by Aston Lloyd and Partners. No, Aston Lloyd and Partners, right? There's no such firm as Aston Lloyd and Partners, right? Whether towards you or, for that matter, anyone else. Furthermore, any suggestion that Coleman CTTS or anyone at the firm was aware of, let alone that they were in some way complicit in fraud of any kind is completely baseless, as your wild and offensive accusations directed at Mr. Coleman and other individuals. We wish to make clear at the outset that while our clients wholly reject the allegations which you have made, neither our clients nor we seek and have never sought to prevent you from raising your purported concerns with the appropriate authorities. Yet they still question the fact that I've contacted the other people about the insurance and I've talked to the SRA, because that's the only people I've talked to. So how can it be a wild, baseless allegation, and then they actually detail what I've said, which I did say? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Indeed, in this latter regard, we are aware that you have made various complaints. In particular, your allegations have been investigated by the Legal Ombudsman following a complaint which you made on the 30th of November. You will be aware that, having carried out this investigation, the Ombudsman concluded that the service provided by Coleman CTTS has been fair and reasonable. They didn't actually, but they just didn't give any substantive comment, and they're just a fluffing organisation. That's all they ever do. They're a replacement of the LCS, which is the Legal Complaint Service, but they never give any award ever against solicitors, and they don't comment on any of the details, and they don't let you know why they've come to the conclusion or who at the legal ombudsman who's given the conclusion. They're very secretive, complete fucking fluffing organisation, just like the FSA or the fucking IPCC or something like that for the police. The ombudsman also made clear that while it was understandable that you were distressed about the problems you had in relation to your purchase of the property in Turkey, this had arisen from the developer's financial problems. Well, that's not for the legal ombudsman to say anyway, so what the fuck's that got to do with anything? For which our clients had no responsibility. Who says? The ombudsman also confirmed our client's position that you were not and never had been a client of Coleman CTTS. Okay, who says? Again, I paid them for their legal fees, so it went into their bank account, so obviously I was. It is therefore regrettable that, faced with the Ombudsman's clear conclusions, you have apparently resolved to attempt to harass and intimidate our clients by sending defamatory and offensive emails indiscriminately to employees of the firm. You even see, somewhat distastefully, it was distasteful, deliberately, to elicit personal details concerning Coleman. Because what I did at the end of one of my emails, I said that if you've got any evidence about any of his sordid, extracurricular activities, to let me know, and I'll keep them quiet, and I'll make sure I use them, very vindictively against him. I quite like that one. That was a good one. So they've only dedicated 4 lines to that. All the other nonsense, quite a lot more lines. It is also now clear from your email to Mr. Collector of the 14th of September, that's the Legal Ombudsman, the Solicitors Regulation Authority Enforcement Department for the Professional Indemnity Insurance, that you are in discussion with the media. No doubt an attempt to have your false allegations published more widely. As we make clear above, notwithstanding the fact that your accusations are completely without foundation, they just go on and on and on. Our clients make no objection to your having drawn them to the attention of the appropriate authorities, but they have done, because that's exactly what they've just objected to. However, given both their gravity and their complete falsity, in the event they just go on and on the same thing again and again, in the event that you do publish these allegations more widely, then we anticipate that our clients will have no alternative but to commence proceedings against you for libel. We urge you to desist from sending any further communications to employees or partners of Coleman CTTS and reserve our clients' rights in this regard, including their right to bring a claim for damages and an injunction against you under the Protection from Harassment Act 1997. If you unreasonably persist in sending such communications to our clients, partners and employees, please ensure that all future communications are via this firm. Naturally, we would urge you to seek legal advice on these matters. Yours faithfully, Carter-Ruck. Right now, that particular letter that they sent there, I wrote straight back to them literally about 2 hours later. I didn't know who they were at the time. I hadn't had a chance to research them. I didn't really care when you were talking bollocks. But the point was, they did write back to me one more time, and I'll write back to them. But anyway, the point is, when I get back onto this macrocosm and the microcosm, they never really got back to me ever since then. You could write to them, they just ignore all my letters. Now, another firm has been contracted via Coleman solicitors. So all this stuff about not talking to their insurers, but you're allowed to talk to, but you're not allowed to, but they might do this, they might do that. That was all bollocks, as I knew it was at the time. Now, they never got back to me, Carter-Ruck, and I always wrote to Coleman straight away anyway. I continued to wind him up. He just blocked my emails because he knew he didn't have a leg to stand on. Thing is, their insurers, I forget what their names are, the underwriters or the brokers. I've got the names. I wrote to them because he did have to hand over his insurance details, and a firm called Rob Simons were taken on. A solicitor called Paul Daly is dealing with the case. Now, Paul Daly was being lied to by Coleman for about a year. He kept coming out with these ridiculous stories that kept contradicting themselves, and eventually it changed from Coleman's is instructing us to the insurers is instructing us. He confirmed that Coleman's aren't. So you see, the thing with this is it's all complete bullshit. It's never going to go anywhere. They're just trying to scare you, and you're just not going to be scared by it because it's all bollocks. They've got absolutely nothing to go on, right? Because I can assure you one thing: if Carter-Ruck thought they had the grounds to get an injunction on you, they will get an injunction on you, and you wouldn't know about it. It will be heard without the parties, and there'll be an interim injunction pending a full injunction, and they would literally get it done the next day. That's what would happen, but they haven't got the evidence. They don't, you see. So it's all a big con, right? Because if they wanted an injunction on you, you would have an injunction on you. And in this instance, they wrote back to me again. So it's like I told them basically to fuck off, and I was just going to ignore them because they had nothing. And they didn't put the injunction on then when I continued to write more emails to them and circulate more stuff to his staff. They just didn't. You see what I'm trying to say? So you've just got to realise that if they write to you again after that, they're just pissing in the wind. It's a complete waste of time. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. So that's like the microcosm. That's to do with me. You remember the macrocosm is Tullett and Brown. They've represented a Ponzi scheme in the past, allowed them to continue to trade by intimidating people who are going to report them and get them stopped. They've also represented the Madeleine McCann's mum and dad. They've extorted not extorted. They've willingly paid them lots of money from that charity that's meant to be to look for the little girl. When people have pointed out things like, the cadaver dog says the baby died in the apartment. So, and they're trying to sue someone now for $1 million. The ex-Portuguese chief of the investigation for €1 million or £1 million or something. But anyway, more sinister. They get a lot more sinister to this firm, right? Because if you look here, you might know that I don't know which solicitor it was, but Carter-Ruck in the past have represented Sally Bercow. Sally Bercow, I don't know if you know who she is. She's the Speaker of the House of Commons wife. And recently Lord McAlpine was accused of being a paedophile, but he wasn't, and the BBC paid out all this money despite the fact they hadn't actually said he was a paedophile, and they'd never actually aired any of the programmes. Now, to get this Adam back, and also, it's a civic thing to do, I sent him an email which was probably going to cause him some trouble in the future, and this is the kind of thing you need to do to deal with these people, I suggest. Right, so to be clear, Sally Bercow put something on Twitter about Lord McAlpine having a guilty conscience. The next thing this is highly publicised, and McAlpine said, I'm going to sue her, but I'm not going to sue anyone else. I'm going to sue her because she's got lots of followers on Twitter. The thing is, she sued him, he sued her, and she immediately offered, I believe, to pay 50 grand as compensation, and she also took on Carter-Ruck as her lawyers. Now, Carter-Ruck are very expensive. A good few years ago, Adam Tudor, the one who I deal with, he charged 20 grand for half a morning's court appearance. Right, so she's immediately apologised. She said she's going to give me 50 grand. Why did she then take on the most expensive libel lawyer's top lawyer in the whole world, who charges a fucking fortune? Why on earth would she do that? It doesn't make any sense, because I say, right, I've done it. Whatever, I'll give you 50 grand. I think in the end she ended up paying him 100 grand. But before that happened, before that case happened, I wrote to Adam and I explained to him that no need to pay 50 grand because it's already been settled in the past. Scallywag Magazine, which is a magazine which is now defunct, about 15 years ago, published that Lord McAlpine and his raping buddy, Dennis Laud, of Big Brother fame. He was a black man. He speaks very posh English, and he was a lobbyist during the Thatcher government. He got on very well with Maggie Thatcher, just like Jimmy Savile and all of her other paedophile friends. Right now, this guy called Angus James already had published this story. So, you see, by sending this to him on an email, that whole cover-up, where quite clearly this Bercow thing's a set-up, it's a PsiOp, it's a psychological operation to make people too scared to accuse paedophiles of being paedophiles, yeah? This Adam Tudor's quite clearly sitting on that case and deliberately going along with everything, so people say, well, she's got the most expensive one in the world. If you can just sort of say something like about a guilty conscience on Twitter, like one line, and that can get you to have to pay out $100 grand in costs when you've got the top libel lawyer in the world, you know, fucking hell, I better not say anything, you know, or I'll be in loads of trouble. So the thing is, that's why I sent the email right now, just so that you can listen to this. I'll just read out the article. It's quite long, but the point is I'll read it out. So if you've got bored of listening, I can understand, but I'll read it out. Right, so it's called Laud McAlpine and I don't know, no, because it's only half a page. I'll get to it. Don't worry about the title. So it's by Angus James, and it was Scallywag Magazine about 15 years ago. A gay paedophile ring working from children's homes throughout the country leads straight to the doors of Parliament and Tory party central office. We have documentary evidence that former Tory party treasurer Laud McAlpine indulged in oral sex with an underage boy. We have evidence that Derek Laud, Dereklaud, close friend of Michael Brown MP, sodomised an underage boy at one children's home so savagely that the child received hospital treatment for a ruptured anus. And we have evidence that Alan Beck, known in gay circles as Sister Latex, and a confidant of Michael Portillo since Peterhouse College, Cambridge, was accused of raping an underage boy in his care. This rent boy ring has operated for more than 20 years and is still in operation at addresses all over Britain, despite the fact that the mastermind behind it all is at present on bail awaiting trial with 10 specimen cases against him. As the case is sub judice, we will call this man Mr. X. It is not the intention of this magazine to be in contempt of court. There is overwhelming evidence that for years young boys in care were systematically raped and abused by Mr. X and many other influential people, that thousands of pounds of public money was misused in order to set up, in inverted commas, training camps at children's homes in Wrexham, Holyhead, Gwynedd, Shropshire and London, where children as young as 4 were schooled in the art of male prostitution, playground for perverts. The children's home collectively called Bryan Allen Community, that was called the Bryan Allen Community, that's BRYN space ALYN Community, under the management of Mr. X, turned over in excess of £12 million every year. It cost £1,000 to £1,500 per week of public money to keep a child in care, according to the policeman in charge of the investigation, Supt Ackerley, I think that's superintendent, Ackerley. 440,000 disappeared from the accounts in 1987 alone. We know this money was used to fund luxury flats in London, Brighton and elsewhere. These apartments were high-class homosexual brothels where Mr. X kept, on a permanent basis, rent boys to cater for VIP clients. Regular visitors included not only Laud McAlpine, who always enjoyed preferential treatment from Mr. X when he turned up at one of the homes in search of a little boy, but also other establishment figures such as the late Lord Kenyon, Kenyon, former chairman of the North Wales Police Authority, Wyn Roberts, MP for Conwy, Conwy, and currently Minister of State at the Welsh Office, Adam Mars Jones, Mars Jones, son of Mr. Justice Jones and the regular film critic on the Independent newspaper, and 6 police officers, among them a former superintendent and prominent Freemason, Clyde Gordon Anglesey. That's CLYWD, Gordon Anglesey, spelt like Anglesey is, who has since retired and is at present under prosecution for raping a minor. The police are aware of allegations of paedophile activities against all of the above. Not all of the above. Part of this story has been reported in other papers. In fact, The Observer, Independent on Sunday, HTV and Private Eye are being sued for libel by ex-Superintendent Supt Anglesey. But ever since the illegal activities inside Brian Allen Community were exposed, shortly after the local council in North Wales has changed from Tory hands to Labour, no one has got to the bottom of it. No one has dared mention the name of Lord McAlpine in connection with sex with an underage boy, even though there is in existence a sworn affidavit from the victim and a sworn police statement, and despite the fact that the police in the case against Mr X seem to take the victim seriously enough to use him as a chief witness for the prosecution, no one has stumbled across the connection between the paedophile ring and the close friends of Portillo and Lily, Lilley, or, for that matter, traced paedophile material produced by one of Mr X's companies in Amsterdam to an address in Dolphin Square, that's in Pimlico by the way, which we have stated in previous issues was under surveillance for some time by British Customs, and where Portillo and Lily were known to visit. There's a picture of Lord McAlpine. The caption underneath said, Lord McAlpine, former treasurer of the Conservative Party. Let's recap the story surrounding Mr X and the homes he managed. Until a Labour council took control of Clyde in 1989, Mr X had enjoyed virtual immunity under the protection of corrupt and implicated policemen, and with the connivance of the Conservative council, who had repressed files of photographic evidence which showed beaten and bruised children over 8 years before, and were all aware of the rumours gushing out of the homes in Gwynedd, that's GWYNEDD, and Wrexham, but who did nothing to investigate them. In fact, the moment the council did react, over 300 victims of child abuse came to light. In Gwynedd alone, there were 146 separate allegations during 1980 to 90. It led Malcolm King, chairman of Clyde's Social Services, to remark, "We are looking at the biggest failure to protect children in the history of Britain." Right. Then the next heading, that's almost the end of, and that was page 6, by the way. The names. The scandal involved girls as well as boys as young as 9. There were, I'll go on to the next page. Yeah, sorry, the title was Lord McAlpine and the Paedophile Ring. That's what it was. I've just got it now. Right, sorry. So, 5 illegitimate pregnancies recorded and numerous accusations of savage violence and rape penetrated by members of staff under the control of Mr X. Not surprisingly, there were also bitter claims over a cover-up going back more than a decade. Indeed, a former North Wales Police Authority chairman claimed his claim 6 years before for an inquiry had been deliberately stifled. However, in 1989, an internal police inquiry led by Detective Superintendent Uckley took over 1,500 statements. A later Joplin inquiry put under suspicion the following 6 police officers, all of whom have now taken early retirement. We've got Supt Anglesey, Sergeant Mike Roche, Sergeant Geraint Morgan, PC David Rogers, PC Peter Sharman, that's Sharman, Sharman maybe, DC Gary Probert, right, there's the names. There were stories of witnesses and people associated with the inquiry being intimidated. Alex Saddington, the Welsh coordinator of the National Association of Young People in Care, was beaten up and had chemicals sprayed in his eyes. Stephen Messam, a key witness against Superintendent Anglesey, was beaten up for the second time. A local BBC journalist who had been working on the child abuse case for 18 months was a victim of a mysterious burglary. Heading, raped. Press coverage centred on the testimony of Stephen Messam and Mark Humphreys, boys who were given a gruesome account of how they had been raped repeatedly by Anglesey. Humphreys described in vivid detail one Christmas holiday at Clyde House in Brian Easton School. On one occasion, he entered my bedroom, attacked me and grabbed my penis. On the second occasion, several days later, he entered my room, pounced on me and held my wrists with his hands so I could not move. He ripped my pyjama shirt and trousers off and pinned me to the bed face down and raped me. I believe I was 13 years old at the time. Mr. X was later prosecuted for 10 counts of sexual abuse. Case files on the 6 officers under suspicion, including Anglesey, were sent to the CPS. No prosecution followed. The CPS stated, "It is not in the public interest to prosecute these police officers." Instead, the men who had been responsible for running the lives of many young helpless boys were nudged gently into retirement with handsome commutation payments and pensions intact. All of the officers with allegations against them were active Freemasons. What a fucking surprise that is. The trial of Mr. X will take place sometime in the summer. The Empire of Mr. X. At the time of the child abuse inquiries, the press only scratched the surface of a paedophile porn empire created by Mr. X over 20 years. It was almost inconceivably evil to take little boys in care from homes owned by Mr. X, such as 34 Inverness Terrace, Bayswater, which has since closed down, or from homes in Castle Road and Finchley Place in London, and subject these children to systematic abuse over a period of years, so they began to accept this treatment as perfectly normal. Many of the victims, as adults now, suffer from grave psychological problems, manic depression, and drug and alcohol dependencies. There was a great deal of money to be made. Mr. X, first and foremost, was a businessman. He used to hire out boys as caddies to the more prestigious members of Wrexham Golf Club. They were forced to do a lot more than simply carry the clubs. For the right price, boys could be collected from any one of his homes and taken out for the night. His favourites were lavishly wined and dined, showered in expensive gifts, and often farmed out to one of his many rent boy brothels throughout the country. For example, Stephen Fong, spelled F-O-N-G, who was moved to 66 Stockwell Grove, Wrexham, had the house bought for him, along with a top-of-the-range white Sierra car. Mr. X also financially maintained numerous boys at houses in Edgware Road, London, Chester Road, Manchester, Nevinson Avenue, South Shields, Queen's Park, Wrexham, Rock Street, Brighton, and so on. All these addresses were used by wealthy paedophiles for sex for cash. The Den at Dolphin Square. Dolphin Square is in Pimlico. It's quite famous for this type of thing. Mr. X also had a ready supply of boys to use in his burgeoning film business. Through a company owned by his niece in Copenhagen, paedophile material was transported to London for private showings in Dolphin Square, and nearby in Winchester Street, Pimlico, where Derek Laud, Michael Brown MP's boyfriend, had set up home. A source in Dolphin Square told us, "We often have underage boys wandering the corridors, totally lost, asking for the flat of a particular MP. According to our source, young boys were often guests at private parties at Dolphin Square, lasting into the small hours. David Steele, who has an apartment here, is rather fond of late nights, our source added. We can reveal Mr. X supplied boys to Dolphin Square on a regular basis. The rich and powerful trusted Mr. X to be discreet. This meant that sometimes ruling his juvenile empire with a rod of iron. If a boy caused him the least, if a boy crossed him the least, he could expect was a beating. The worst, as in the case of Adrian Jones, 16, was to lose his life. 18 months ago, Jones was living with 4 other boys in a boarding house in Brighton. It was just another brothel funded by Mr. X. Jones, however, got greedy and threatened to blackmail his boss. Soon afterwards, the boarding house went up in flames. All the boys died in the fire. The Sussex Fire Brigade deducted it was arson. A culprit was found. Another young boy claimed he had started the fire as a prank. He mysteriously fell under a bus and was crushed to death. Today, the Fire Brigade are pressing to have the case reopened. The prime suspect is Mr. X. There's a picture and it's got Mr. X, but his face is blacked out. Mr. X, the paedophile behind Britain's biggest child abuse scandal. Right, this is coming towards the end of Scallywag, page 7. Apart from the children's home, the upmarket prostitution, and the lucrative sideline in paedophile literature, Mr. X had 6 other businesses with sick irony through 2 of his companies, Video People and Tape to Tape. He produced a song for charity in 1988. The charity was Save the Children. By all accounts, it did rather well. Right. Fucking hell. 2 more pages to go. Right. The title being McAlpine is a pervert, all part of the same thing. Next page. Here's one of Britain's richest and most respectable men, a pillar of the establishment and a bulwark of the Conservative Party. However, a damning police statement and a sworn affidavit from a boy called Paul cast potentially ruinous doubt over Lord McAlpine's character. He is a copper-bottomed, true blue pervert who, it appears, enjoys nothing better than being sucked off by little children. Indeed, long before he sought the services of Mr. X, McAlpine was indulging in his sordid desires. In 1965, he was formally cautioned by Strathclyde police for a sexual offence against a minor, but he got away with it. Men of his wealth and standing usually do. However, Paul's crucial testimony does not let Lord McAlpine off so easily. In November 1985, Paul was 17 years old and living in a halfway house owned by the Brian Allen community at Summerhill on the outskirts of Wrexham. He was one of Mr. X's prize boys who had been taken into care aged 4 and had continually homosexually abused. He was one of Mr. X's prize boys who had been taken into care aged 4 and had continuously homosexually abused at Norton School in Warwickshire from the age of 8. The English doesn't make sense. The older boy used to bugger him every night. Older boys used to bugger him every night. Mr. X found him when he was 14, and he was immediately attracted by the fact that he was a punk and wore red lipstick. He immediately persuaded Paul to suck his cock. In the boy's own words, he likes to be fucked and ... blowjobs. There's a like caption. One of the shots was of Lord McAlpine. Paul identified himself immediately. There was not a moment's hesitation or a scrap of doubt. New heading, Fellatio. Mr. X obviously thought Paul was extremely promising because when Lord McAlpine came in search for a young boy to molest, Paul was chosen as the one to service one of his master's most important clients. He was told to go out for the night with him, to be good and give him what he wanted. At this stage, Paul had no idea who the well-dressed man with greying hair and a roundish face really was. He was taken for an expensive meal at a restaurant in Chester. His benefactor paid with a gold credit card, and Paul noticed a selection of other cards tucked into his wallet. Driving back to Summerhill, McAlpine stopped the car in a lay-by where Paul was required to suck him off. Afterwards, he was deposited back at the home with the promise of a Christmas hamper, which never arrived. Paul left Summerhill a deeply confused and depressing young man. For a while, he lived in Brighton and was supported by Mr. X until finally he broke away and severed all ties. But it was not until Brian Johnson, Thomas's article about the Superintendent Anglesey appeared in Private Eye in January 1993 that Paul summoned up the courage to speak out. He contacted Thomas and after several detailed interviews was persuaded to give evidence to the police. McAlpine identified. Thomas, who had heard various rumours about McAlpine's activities, believed there was a connection with Mr. X. Showed Paul Thomas, who had heard various rumours about McAlpine's activities and believed there was a connection with Mr. X, showed Paul 4 photographs of completely different men, all about the same age, who could have easily fitted Paul's description. One of the shots was of Lord McAlpine. Paul identified him immediately. There was not a moment's hesitation or scrap of doubt. He was absolutely certain McAlpine was the man. Superintendent Ackley the man in charge of the child abuse investigation, took Paul's testimony in person and believed him. A formal statement was made to North Wales CID. 2 officers interviewed Paul for 2 days. His testimony and the photographs used to identify Lord McAlpine are now with the police pending the trial. However, we have Paul's sworn affidavit given to Thomas. Right, there's a sort of caption in the middle. He is a copper-bottomed true blue pervert who it appears enjoys nothing more than being sucked off by little children. That's in about font 20, sort of in the middle of the text. Again, it's repeating what's been said before. He is now 25 and living in a stable homosexual relationship in Brighton. He has no connection with male prostitution and, to this day, stands by every word of his statement. Good golly, Miss Polly. In Scallywag 21, we told how soon after their marriage, Mr. and Mrs. Portillo went on holiday with Michael Brown MP and his friend, in inverted commas, a black youth who they nicknamed Golly. Along on this mystery trip also went Tony Hutt, H-U-T-T, who we allege was an actively gay lobbyist with the firm GJW Government Relations, but who was Golly. By taking him on holiday, the Portillos were in good company. Golly is no other than half-caste nephew and research assistant of Lord Pitt, P-I-T-T, and was the black face pictured at the window of number 10 as Maggie peeped through the partially opened curtains on the day she quit. His name is Derek Laud, and it was he who introduced footballer Justin Fashanu to Westminster's seedy inhabitants. It was alleged by Fashanu, F-A-S-H-A-N-U, himself on tape that this included both Portillo and Lily in a 3-in-a-bed romp, although under intense pressure from somewhere he later denied he had ever said it. But if Fashanu was telling the truth, he may have been introduced to many other well-known parliamentary personalities, and you can throw in some royals for good measure. Laud has also been on holiday with Lily. Chris, C-H-A-T-A-W-A-W, so it's Chris Chataway and Jeffrey Archer. Right. Laud has also been on holiday with Lily, Chris Chataway and Jeffrey Archer. He enjoys entertaining his boyfriends at a fashionable La Caprice where he treats the waiters like horse dung. He has often been seen there with Fergie's friend John Bryan and also Diana's hairdresser, who was rumoured to have been bribed by Diana to take the rap on a drugs charge. Royal connection. After leaving a lunch with Fergie's boyfriend, who was going off to meet her elsewhere, he then joined Andrew, a sailor pal, at the royal home in Dorset for all sorts of fun and games. He was also involved somewhere in the middle of the Diana Gilby scandal and is a frequent visitor to David Steele's flat in the now notorious Dolphin Square. Golly rarely entertains anyone of note at his Winchester Street Pimlico flat, just around the corner from Dolphin Square, but neighbours report he often takes young men home and they generally stay all night. The Dolphin Square restaurant, of course, is where both Lily and Portillo dine most Friday nights and was, for a time, under scrutiny by Her Majesty's Customs after they had intercepted paedophile material at Mount Pleasant. Young men who have visited him in Pimlico, who have talked to, allege he is trying them out for higher things. Fashanu was one such. Laud is a consultant with Ludgate Communications, a high-powered political public relations outfit which moves in political business and royal circles. In this capacity, Laud has even written speeches for Prince Charles. The last page is coming up, which is page 9. That last one was page 8. Yeah. As a speechwriter, he may legitimately have visited many prominent politicians, but it is unlikely he would have gone on holiday with Portillo, Brown, Hutt and co. to cross the T's and dot the I's on a possible oration. In his public relations capacity, he is a frequent visitor to Conservative Central Office, where he meets Alistair Cook, with an E on the end, one of the original right-wing conspirators of the Maurice Coaling days in Cambridge, who has surrounded himself with bright young things, most of whom are frequent visitors to Winchester Street. But there is more to Derek Laud than this cover-up. The story goes on in a disgraceful catalogue of abuse, exploitation and cover-ups on an unprecedented scale. Among all the sad testimonies from the victims, two names emerge that connect the paedophile ring directly with Michael Portillo, Peter Lilly and other high-ranking Tories. The first is the above-mentioned Derek Laud, who wanders with equanimity in the House of Parliament. The second is Alan Beck, B-E-C-K, alias Sister Latex, and an old friend of Portillo's from Cambridge. We have known about Laud for a long time. There was no doubt about his association with Brown. It was an old yarn. The News of the World had run an article on Laud serving tea to Brown in a skimpy frilly pinny 6 years ago. We also had reason to believe that Laud had screwed Portillo and Lilly on several occasions, but it came as a revelation to learn that Derek Laud was also a practicing paedophile. Stephen Hassim, H-A-S-S-H-I-M, was only 13 when he was introduced to Laud. He was living in care at Greystones Heath Children's Home, Merseyside. Gary Cook, an associate of Mr. X, who is now in prison for child abuse, brought Laud in on the recommendation of Mr. X. He gave him Stephen for the night. The child was repeatedly brutally buggered by Laud. He has since stated that the man had such a large penis that it was excruciatingly painful. In fact, the next day, Stephen Hassan had to go to hospital and receive treatment for a ruptured anus. He never met Laud again, but has positively identified him and remembers his name, Sister Latex. Alan Beck was a source on the Portillo Lilly story. He called us in mid-February to scotch the rumours about Portillo's homosexuality. He was a set-up and we knew it. He claimed that he was the only homosexual to come out at Peterhouse. This was not true. We have spoken to others who also freely admitted their sexual proclivities at the time. He admitted there was an influential ultra-right-wing homosexual set at Peterhouse, but denied he was part of it. This was untrue. We have spoken to other sources at Cambridge who state categorically that Alan Beck was deeply involved with the group of gays under the control of Professor Maurice Cowling. Beck told us, on the one hand, that Peterhouse was a very intimate college with only 120 students, then, mysteriously, could not remember any of their names. However, he did remember Portillo, but denied there was any evidence that he was gay. This was bullshit. The man had such a large penis that it was excruciatingly painful. In fact, the next day, Stephen Hassim, it's spelled differently here, it's spelled H-A-S-H-I-M, before I think it was it was H-A-S-S-H-I-M, had to go to hospital to receive treatment for a ruptured anus, right? Beck may have been a liar activated by interested parties to feed us disinformation, but, like Laud, we had no reason to suspect he was a paedophile. That is, until we were made aware of an incident that happened in 1982 involving another 14-year-old boy, David Sellers, S-E-L-L-E-R-S. Buggered. Alan Beck helped organise a farm holiday for the kids at Greystone Heath. The trip was under the stewardship of a newly qualified social worker called Alan Langshaw, who was subsequently divorced after the non-consummation of his marriage and suspended from his duties during a later spell at a home in Formby, F-O-R-M-B-Y. Langshaw was a close associate of paedophile Stephen Norris, who also went on the trip and has since been convicted for child abuse. While at the farm in Leicestershire, David Sellers was raped savagely by Beck. The day afterwards, a distraught Sellers told Wrexham police everything that had happened. Beck was questioned at length, but mysteriously no prosecution followed. This was also almost certainly due to the fact that Superintendent Anglesey was the man in charge. It is not unreasonable to speculate that Sister Latex called in a few favours from his old Peterhouse chums in order to get himself off the hook. It remains to be seen whether, under the scrutiny of the court, perverts like McAlpine, Derek Laud and Alan Beck will wriggle out of it again. Scallywag says, "This whole sordid saga does not come as a surprise. Having investigated this and other stories concerning the depraved activities of certain Tory MPs, nothing is surprising anymore. There seems to be no end to it. There can be little doubt that one of Britain's most ambitious and profitable paedophile rings, run by a ruthless pervert, had direct connections with leading Tories, that large sums of public money were misused to fund a network of rent boy brothels, and that politicians involved in the ring, in particular former Treasurer Lord McAlpine, were fully aware of these funds being misappropriated." Paul, the boy who claims to have been molested by Lord McAlpine, has never wavered from the statement that he gave to police and the affidavit he swore to journalist Brian Johnson, Johnsson Thomas, Brian Johnson Thomas. There is no reason to doubt his word. Even the police seem happy that Paul is a credible witness for the prosecution and is capable of withstanding cross-examination by eminent QCs. Therefore, taking Paul's testimony into account and the formal warning by Strathclyde Police against McAlpine for a similar offence in 1965, I didn't realise there'd been similar offences, the conclusion must be that Lord McAlpine is not only a crook, but a paedophile. Should Lord McAlpine choose to consult his solicitors over the story we have printed, we would welcome the opportunity of dragging his name through the court. Should he choose not to take action, then let his silence incriminate him. We shall defend our story assiduously, for no one was there to defend the children continually abused by their rich and powerful overseers. There is no evidence as yet that either Michael Portillo or Peter Lilly was involved directly in the paedophile ring. However, people very close to them were. There have been continual rumours that both ministers indulge in underage rent boys. Derek Laud, a frequent visitor to Parliament and paedophile, is a strange friend for supposedly reputable ministers. Alan Beck, a rapist and child abuser, is equally suspect. It is implausible that Portillo and Lilly are not aware of the paedophile ring, and it is very likely Laud would have told them. So, if they don't rape little boys themselves, they know a man who does. Likewise, should Messrs Portillo, M-E-S-S-R-S, I don't know what that means, Messrs Portillo and Lilly choose to take legal action, as we have heard they might, we would have not the slightest compunction about the eventual outcome. And by the way, just for the record, the editors of Scallywag absolutely hate Satsumas. I don't know what that means. Anyway, that's the end of it. The whole point, I hope you glean from that, is that these people made unequivocal accusations that Lord McAlpine was misappropriating funds, and he was the Tory Treasurer, and he was a rapist, and he was a child molester. That was put in print, and it's quite a famous magazine. It wasn't widely circulated, but people in Parliament, just like with Private Eye, not that many people read it, but it's a significant readership. So the fact that Carter-Ruck have ignored this and gone and paid the guy $100,000, and the BBC have paid him all, I hope you'll realise it's a psychological operation. It's pedos win prizes, give them some money so that it scares the shit out of the population, just generally undermines the country and makes everybody feel really depressed about everything. But you see, the microcosm meets the macrocosm. You've got the same people writing to me about this Ponzi scheme. They've also been writing to other people about Ponzi schemes that continued in operation. This one's continued in operation. The money's been misappropriated as a result of this. And you start to see that the world's a lot smaller than what you think. It's all about how you act. And, if you regard yourself as a worthless know-nothing, then that's how these scumbags will also regard you, and they'll just you'll just be a complete insignificant waste of time. If you stand up for yourself and realise the emperor doesn't wear no clothes, there are positive results that can be gleaned from it. Thanks very much for listening. You can get me on tomcarhill@hotmail.com or Tom Carhill, but in both of those instances it's a 0 instead of an O in Tom, so it's T0MCAHILL. That's my Skype name, and @hotmail.com would be how you get me on my emails. Thanks very much. Bye bye.